In today's episode, Christy asks, what slang does your brand use on social media? Any you avoid? Slang's an interesting challenge because very often it is not just a broad audience, like a generation. A lot of people will say, like, using the language of the kids these days, right? the old get off my lawn thing. But slang is really tricky because it isn't just generational, it's contextual to a specific group of people. Every individual group, including your audience, has its own slang, has its own lingo. In B2B, for example, we have tons of jargon. In marketing, we have tons of jargon. We talk about things like customer journeys and CX and UX and all this stuff that somebody outside of our group wouldn't know. Right? The acronyms are inscrutable. And we do this because, as humans, it's a way for us to be able to identify other people in our group, identify people in our tribe. And the rationale of a brand using this, obviously, is to say, like, hey, we're one of you too, if you actually are. Now, if you're not, trying to use slang is fraught with danger. Because, again, using the terminology, it is incredibly tricky unless you have done extensive study. So if you want to use slang to relate to your audience better, you've got to understand all of the cultural context that goes with it. There's a process called ethnography. It's from anthropology that effectively does this, where you kind of like Margaret Mead or Jane Goodall, you embed yourself in that society, in that group, and maybe you don't participate at all. You just listen. You listen, you study, you vacuum up data, you analyze it, and you understand the different terminology, the different contexts that certain words are used in. If you have an audience that has a community or someplace that's publicly accessible, or is accessible with minimal invitation, that's the place to start. If there's a Reddit, a subreddit out there on Reddit, if there is a Slack group or a Discord group that you can join, go live in nature like an anthropologist would in that community and listen. Listen to see how language is used and how people are using it to convey meaning. It's really tricky. And it may require you to actually sit down and talk to people and ask them and understand what things mean in the context of that community, because even sites like Urban Dictionary, which are great and fantastic resources, and I strongly recommend having it bookmarked in your browser, even those will not necessarily tell you how your group is behaving, the context of your society that you're trying to study. Really simple example. When somebody uses the slang term egg, they could mean very different things depending on what group you're in and the context it's being used in. They could mean somebody who is transgender who hasn't come out. They could mean somebody who's an idiot, which is a slang term in New Zealand. It could mean somebody who is ethnically white but behaves in a manner that is, let's just say, they have a strong affinity for Asian cultures, right? And you can see how these terms could be very offensive if you use them incorrectly. One of the things that we always advise marketers is, before you roll out a marketing campaign, somebody should do an Urban Dictionary check to make sure that key points are not inadvertently offensive. Slang is even more tricky because you're trying to use the language, and you may or may not have the context correct without a lot of study. Budget for yourself months, weeks, if not months, to learn this stuff. Now, you may be saying, well, that sounds crazy. I'm just not going to use any because I don't want to spend months studying something just to use certain terminology on social media. It's more than that. If you do an ethnography project correctly, You gain a very good, deep understanding of the audience in ways that simply just skimming posts on Reddit would never get you. And there's a lot of value in that because it helps you guide your marketing. Ethnography projects are something I have strongly recommended for marketers for years and years and years, because when you understand your audience, you will create marketing that is much more personal, much more in depth, and much more meaningful to people. Again, with or without the slang, just knowing that, for example, there are people who are ethnically one group that associate and have an affinity for it in another group is an important context. It's something that, as long as it's not offensive, you might want to figure out how do you work that in to the conversations you have with people in this target group. So there are a bunch of frameworks out there that are really good for understanding sort of all these different ethnography things. Dr. James Spradley probably has the most thorough network, most thorough framework when it comes to ethnography. So check out his papers over on Google Scholar. You can read about how Spradley's framework works. It covers things like space, actors, activities, objects, acts, events, time, goals, feelings. And anthropologists use this to document what they're doing in a different society that they're studying. And most importantly, create interactions, chart out interactions between all these different things so that you understand how this group of people approaches all of their interactions with each other. And you can use technology for it, but a lot of it is qualitative. A lot of it is just sitting down and listening, maybe doing one-on-ones with key members of the community. That's how you make progress in this sort of thing, and how you eventually learn, A, whether the slang exists or not, B, what it means, and C, whether you have any right to use it or not. So we could spend a whole lot of time on this, but I will say go study. Don't use it without study, and give yourself the time to do it right and to do it thoroughly. And it will have a much bigger effect and impact on your marketing than just slang on social media posts. It will help you really understand your customers or your potential customers so well. If you have follow-up questions, leave them in the comments box below. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and the newsletter. I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Want help solving your company's data, analytics, and digital marketing problems? Visit trustinsights.ai today and let us know how we can help you.